Hello everyone. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It really helps YouTube show you more stories like this one. Now let's get started. The night shift always stretched time in strange ways, especially in the oncology wing. The hallways were long and narrow, lined with glass walls instead of solid ones, so you could see straight into patient rooms without opening doors. It was meant to help with observation and infection control. It also meant you were never really alone, even when the wing was quiet. At 3:19 a.m., the place had a very specific feeling. The lights were dimmed but never fully dark. The floors were clean enough to reflect the ceiling panels. The air smelled like disinfectant and warm plastic from the machines that never slept. I had been charting at one of the standing desks near the center of the wing. My back was to the hallway glass. I remember being tired in a deep way, not just sleepy but heavy, like my thoughts were moving through thick mud. I had worked 4 nights in a row. My eyes burned from staring at screens, and my neck hurt from leaning forward too long. I kept rolling my shoulders and shifting my weight to stay alert. While I was typing, I noticed movement in the glass in front of me. The glass reflected the hallway behind my back. At first, it was just a normal glance, the way you check without really thinking. I saw my own shape there. Same posture, same dark scrubs, same badge hanging at my chest. It was comforting in a small way, proof that I was still present and upright. I finished a sentence, hit save, and turned slightly to reach for a paper chart. When I looked back at the glass, my reflection was still standing where it had been before, facing the desk. That was wrong. I had shifted, but the reflection had not. For a second, my brain tried to fix it. I told myself it was the angle, or that I had misjudged the timing. I held still and watched. The reflection lifted its right hand slowly, fingers spreading apart. My arms stayed at my sides. I felt the weight of my hands against my thighs. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. The reflection's movement was smooth and deliberate, like someone who knew they were being watched. There was no blur, no distortion. It looked exactly like me. My heart started beating hard enough that I could hear it in my ears. The rest of the wing felt very far away. The machine still hummed, and a monitor alarm sounded somewhere down the hall, but it all felt muted. I turned around fast, expecting to see someone standing behind me, some trick of the glass or lighting. The hallway was empty. No one stood there. The floor was clear. The doors were closed. The glass walls showed empty reflections. When I turned back to the desk, the reflection was gone. It was just glass again, showing the opposite wall and the faint outline of ceiling lights. I stood there for a long time, breathing slowly, telling myself that fatigue does strange things. I rubbed my eyes and drank water. My hands were shaking, so I waited until they stopped before touching the keyboard again. I tried to focus on work. I moved to a different desk closer to the nurse's station. I avoided looking at the glass unless I had to. Every reflection made my stomach tighten. The longer the night went on, the more aware I became of every small sound and movement. The lights flickered once around 4 a.m., just a brief dip, something that happened often in that old building. When they came back steady, I realized I was sweating under my scrubs. Later, while doing rounds, I passed the same stretch of hallway where it had happened. The glass looked normal. My reflection moved when I moved. I tested it in small ways, shifting my head, raising a shoulder. Everything matched. I felt embarrassed for being scared. I told myself I would laugh about it later, maybe blame too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Near the end of the shift, something else happened. I was checking vitals through the glass of a patient room, careful not to wake them. As I stepped away, I noticed a note in the chart about overnight behavior. It mentioned that someone had been standing outside the room for a long time earlier, visible through the glass. The note described the figure as still, facing inward, there for hours. There was no record of anyone assigned to that room during that time. I felt cold all over. I checked the staffing logs. My name was not listed there during those hours. I had been charting, then doing rounds elsewhere. The timing lined up with when I had been at the desk, with my back to the hallway. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, like a headache trying to form. After my shift ended, I stayed longer than usual. I went to the security office and requested to review the hallway footage. This was not something I did lightly. I told myself I needed proof that there was a reasonable explanation. The guard pulled up the cameras without comment. The screen showed the oncology wing from multiple angles, black and white, grainy but clear enough. On the footage from 3 a.m. onward, I saw myself at the desk, typing. I also saw myself in the hallway behind me. The second figure stood near the glass wall of the patient room, facing inward. It did not move much. It shifted weight occasionally, leaned closer to the glass, then straightened again. The figure stayed there for a long time, longer than any normal check would take. At one point, the hallway lights flickered, and the standing figure vanished from the camera. At the same moment, the version of me at the desk flinched and turned around. There was no cut in the video. No glitch. Just one me at the desk and one me in the hall, existing at the same time until the lights changed. I watched the footage again and again until my eyes hurt. The timestamps matched. My badge, my hair, my posture were identical. There was no one else entering or leaving the area. No shadows that could explain it. The building system's log later showed a brief power fluctuation at that exact minute. I went home after that in a fog. I did not sleep. Over the next few days, I started noticing gaps in my memory. Small things at first. I would find notes written in my handwriting that I did not remember writing. I would arrive in a room without recalling walking there. I started reading about extreme fatigue, dissociation, and microsleeps. People could move and act while parts of their awareness shut down. The brain could split attention in ways that felt impossible. I realized something I did not want to accept. That night, I had not seen a reflection acting on its own. I had been standing in the hallway for hours, staring through the glass, while another part of me believed I was still at the desk. The glass, the lighting, and my exhausted brain had allowed me to see myself without recognizing it as real. When the lights flickered, my attention snapped back together, and the image disappeared because I finally turned and faced the empty hall where I had just been. The patient had not seen anything supernatural. They had seen a staff member standing there, unmoving, present but not present. The cameras did not show a copy of me. They showed one body and a mind that was not fully inside it. I took time off after that. I sleep now. I avoid mirrors when I am tired. When I walk past glass walls at night, I make sure my reflection follows me exactly. I do not trust it otherwise. I was working nights at the Regional Medical Center in Arizona, the kind of shift where time feels thick and slow. At 1:56 a.m., the hospital was quiet in the way only hospitals get after midnight. The hall lights were dimmed, but never off. The air smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. My shoes made soft sounds against the floor as I walked past closed doors and empty bays. Most patients were asleep or sedated. Most of the staff moved like they were underwater. I was charting at the nurse's station, typing notes that felt automatic after years of doing the same thing. My screen showed the usual list of patients, room numbers, vitals scrolling in steady lines. Nothing stood out. The monitors around the station hummed and beeped in a pattern I barely noticed anymore. It was normal, boring, safe. Then the overhead system activated. A code blue was announced, but there was no room number. That alone was wrong. A code blue always has a location. Always. We rely on that. Without it, the words just hang there useless. Everyone around me stopped moving. Pens froze midair. Hands paused on keyboards. Someone down the hall was pushing a cart and stopped so fast the wheels squeaked. We all waited for the correction, the second announcement that fixes the mistake. Dispatch usually repeats it within seconds. It came again. Same thing. Code blue. No room number. My chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with confusion. I looked at the central monitors. One of the screens had changed. A new patient tile had appeared at the bottom, highlighted like an active emergency. No name. No age. No room. Just vitals. The heart rate was visible and dropping fast. Oxygen saturation was unstable, bouncing and then sinking. Blood pressure flickered in and out, numbers half formed, then gone. The system showed waveforms like someone was hooked up to a monitor somewhere in the building. But there was no patient assigned to that data. I checked the admissions list. Nothing new. I refreshed the screen. Still nothing. The charge nurse was doing the same thing, tapping keys harder than necessary. People started walking faster, heading toward hallways, scanning door numbers, trying to find a room that made sense. We all knew it was pointless, but standing still felt worse. I pulled up the equipment log. The vitals were coming from a telemetry device, one we use for cardiac monitoring. The serial number was listed. That meant the system thought a real piece of equipment was in use. Those devices are checked out to patients. They do not turn on by themselves. The heart rate dipped below 40. The oxygen number went red. Alarms sounded at the station, overlapping and sharp. I could hear my own breathing in my ears, too loud, too fast. I kept thinking there had to be a patient somewhere alone, maybe in a hallway, maybe in imaging, maybe in transport. Someone forgotten. Someone dying, because we could not find them. Then at 2:01 a.m., the alarms stopped. The vitals went flat. The monitor displayed the word deceased where a name should have been. The system timestamped it like it would any other death. Clean. Official. Logged. The hospital felt different after that. Quieter, but not calm. More like the quiet after something breaks. Administration came down later and told us it was a system error. They said it was a test patient that accidentally activated. They said the data merged wrong during an update. They said to ignore it and move on. They told us not to document it anywhere outside of a brief technical report. They told us the death log would be corrected. The problem was that none of those explanations matched what we saw. Test patients do not use real telemetry devices. Data merges do not create live waveforms that respond like a real human body failing. System errors do not time deaths down to the minute and log them in multiple databases at once. Over the next few nights, I started paying closer attention. I checked equipment more carefully. I memorized serial numbers. I watched the monitors even when nothing was happening. I noticed small things I had ignored before, like how some telemetry units were missing for hours before being found plugged in on empty beds. Like how the transport logs sometimes showed movements with no staff assigned. I requested access to the back-end logs, something I normally never touched. I told myself it was curiosity. It was not. It was fear dressed up as professionalism. What I found made my stomach sink. At 1:42 a.m. that same night, 14 minutes before the code blew, a telemetry device had been activated in the system. It was assigned automatically, not by a nurse or a clerk, but by an interface process that links the emergency department to inpatient floors. That process only triggers when a patient is moved internally. The system thought a patient had been transferred. From where to where was blank. The device ID matched a unit that had been reported lost 2 months earlier. It was never officially decommissioned. It just disappeared. According to the logs, it came back online that night, connected to the network, and began transmitting data. The vitals did not start critical. They were normal at first. A steady heart rate. Good oxygen. It looked like someone resting. Over the next 15 minutes, the numbers slowly declined. Not suddenly. Not like a glitch. Like a body shutting down. I pulled security footage timestamps, even though I was not supposed to. Cameras cover hallways, elevators, equipment rooms. At 1:38 a.m., one of the service elevators moved from the basement to the 3rd floor without a badge swipe. That happened sometimes during maintenance, but there was no maintenance scheduled. The doors opened onto an empty hall. No one exited. The elevator doors closed and went back down. At 1:41 a.m., the same elevator went to the 4th floor. Again, no one visible. I kept digging. The system had logged a patient identifier for the telemetry data, a long number usually tied to a medical record. It did not match any active patient. It did not match any discharged patient either. When I searched archived records, the system lagged, then pulled up a file marked restricted. The patient had died 3 years earlier. They had been brought in unconscious, found on the side of the highway during a heat wave. No ID. No family found. They coded in the emergency department and were pronounced dead after prolonged resuscitation. The case was closed as unidentified. The medical record remained in the system, incomplete, flagged, but never fully purged. That same identifier was now attached to the telemetry data from that night. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, a recycling error, some leftover data resurfacing. But the vitals from that night did not match the old case. They were new. They were live. They ended at 2:01 a.m., and the system marked the patient deceased again, as if it was closing a loop. Administration eventually noticed I was asking too many questions. I was told again to let it go. They reminded me that hospitals are complex systems and errors happen. They said dwelling on it was unhealthy. What they did not say was that they had quietly removed that telemetry device from the inventory list. They marked it as destroyed, even though no one could say where it physically was. They also adjusted the death log, but not fully. The timestamp remains in a shadow table used for audits. It cannot be deleted without triggering an alert at the state level. I know because I checked. I still work nights, but I do not walk the halls alone anymore. None of us do. It is not superstition. It is habit born from something real that we could not explain away cleanly. We pair up for rounds. We double-check empty beds. We confirm equipment locations at the start and end of every shift. Sometimes, around the same time each night, I see the monitors flicker for a split second, like they are about to add another patient tile. They never do. The system stays quiet. No alarms. No codes. But the death at 2:01 a.m. is still there, buried in the data. A second official death for someone who was already gone. Logged by a hospital that insists nothing happened. I believe someone died that night. Not in a dramatic way. Not surrounded by people trying to save them. I think a person slipped through every safeguard we trust, became nothing but numbers moving through software, and shut down alone while we stood under bright lights waiting for a room number that never came. That is why the silence afterward felt so heavy. It was not empty. It was finished. I always saved one last round for the end of my shift. It was a habit I picked up my first year at Riverside Hospital, back when I still believed routines could protect you from mistakes. The night shift ran on habits. Same halls, same lights buzzing above the linoleum, same smell of disinfectant mixed with old coffee. That final round was my way of leaving things neat, of telling myself I had done everything I could before handing the floor over to the morning crew. That morning started like any other. The sky outside the narrow windows was still dark, but I could feel dawn coming in the way the air changed cooler and thinner. My feet hurt in that dull, steady way they always did by the end of 12 hours. The cuffs of my scrubs were stiff from dried sanitizer. My badge hung heavy on my chest, warm from my body heat, the plastic edges worn smooth from years of use. The floor was quieter than usual. Fewer call lights. Fewer alarms. Machines still hummed and clicked, keeping their steady rhythm, but there was a calm I didn't trust. I checked my watch. Just after 5. Enough time for one last pass through every room. I moved room to room, pushing the cart with my clipboard and scanner, reading charts under the harsh white lights. Each patient was awake in their own way. Some stared at the ceiling. Some watched the early news with the volume low. Some slept with their mouths open, breathing shallow and even. I checked vitals, adjusted blankets, made notes. Every person looked at me with the same tired eyes, the kind that see too much ceiling tile and not enough sky. As I finished with each one, there was a strange sameness to their expressions, like they were all thinking the same thought. It made my skin itch, but I blamed the exhaustion. The halls felt longer as I walked them. The floor buffer marks on the walls seemed darker, like shadows that hadn't been there before. I could hear my own breathing inside my head, loud and uneven. I tried to slow it down. I told myself I was just ready to go home. Near the end of the wing, one patient reached out and grabbed my wrist as I leaned in to check the 4-line. Their grip was stronger than I expected. Their fingers were cold and dry, pressing into the soft part of my arm. I froze, more surprised than afraid. I pulled my arm back gently and finished my check. My heart was racing, but I told myself it was nothing. People get confused at that hour. Sleep and medication mix badly. Still, my wrist throbbed where they had touched me, like the skin remembered it. I finished the last room and stood at the nurse's station, flipping through my notes. The clock on the wall read 5:10 a.m. The red second hand jumped in small, sharp movements. I could hear the HVAC system kick on, pushing stale air through the vents. I gathered my things, slid my clipboard into the drawer, and headed toward the exit that led to the employee lockers and time clock. The badge reader was mounted beside the door, a dull gray box with a small green light. I held my badge up, the same way I had thousands of times before. The light stayed red. I tried again, slower. Red. I wiped the badge on my scrub top and tried once more. Red. I felt a flicker of irritation. The system was old. It glitched sometimes. I checked the time again. 5:11 a.m. I stepped back and waved the badge again. Nothing. The door stayed locked. I pressed the button to call security, but the phone on the wall was dead. No dial tone. I looked down the hall. It was empty, lights still dimmed for night shift. I could hear a monitor alarm start up somewhere far away, then stop. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a band around it. I tried the badge one more time. Still red. I decided to walk to the main exit. It was farther, but it should be open. As I walked, the floor seemed uneven, like it sloped gently downward. The overhead lights flickered, not fully going out, just dimming and brightening in a slow pulse. I told myself I was imagining it. Lack of sleep does that. Halfway down the hall, a wave of dizziness hit me. The walls tilted. I stopped and put my hand against the cool paint, breathing through my nose. The smell of antiseptic felt too strong, burning the back of my throat. My vision narrowed, like I was looking through a tunnel. I checked my watch again. It still said 5:11. The second hand wasn't moving. My badge felt heavier against my chest, like it was pulling me forward. My legs trembled. I took another step and nearly fell. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt, each beat echoing in my ears. I thought about sitting down, just for a second, until the feeling passed. I didn't make it to the chair. I remember the floor rushing up to meet me, the cold shock of it through my scrubs. I remember the smell of dust and cleaner right against my face. My body felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. I could hear machines beeping again, closer this time, but muffled, like they were underwater. Time stretched in a strange way. I don't know how long I lay there. My thoughts came slow and heavy. I tried to move my fingers. They didn't respond. The lights above me blurred into long white streaks. I felt pressure in my chest, deep and crushing, then a numbness that spread outward, taking everything with it. At some point, the hall lights brightened. Morning shift. Shoes hurried past me, close enough that I could see the scuffed soles, the laces swinging loose. No one looked down. No one noticed me lying there, half in shadow, half in light. The alarms I heard were for other rooms, other patients. The world narrowed to small details. A crack in the tile near my cheek. A piece of lint drifting in the air. The hum of electricity in the walls. My breathing slowed without my permission. Each breath felt like work. Later, I learned the facts. HR records showed that my badge registered a successful clockout at 5:12 a.m. The system logged it cleanly, no errors. According to the computer, I left on time. According to the schedule, my shift ended without issue. They found me at 6:03 a.m. during a routine safety check, still on the floor between the nurses' station and the main exit. The report said cardiac event. Sudden. No warning signs noted. They said the badge reader near the exit had malfunctioned and sent a delayed signal when it reset. One final scan recorded after my heart had already stopped. The hospital moved on the way it always does. The floor was cleaned. The schedule was adjusted. My locker was emptied. My badge was deactivated and placed in an envelope. The last round I took was recorded as complete. On paper, I left the building. In reality, I never made it past the door. I worked the night shift at Memorial Hospital in Virginia because it paid a little more and because the halls were quieter. At night, the building felt older, like it sank back into itself once the sun went down. The lights buzzed instead of hummed. The floor wax smelled sharper. Every sound carried farther, carts rolling, distant monitors beeping, the air system breathing through the vents. Time moved differently between midnight and morning. Hours stretched thin, then suddenly collapsed. That was where I first noticed Dr. Harris. He was one of the night physicians everyone recognized, but no one really knew. He always wore the same pale blue coat, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and a gold watch with a cracked face on his left wrist. The watch ticked loud enough that I could hear it when he passed close by. He walked with steady steps, not rushed, not slow. His posture was straight, his hair neatly parted, gray but thick. His face looked calm in a way that felt old-fashioned, like it belonged in a black and white photo. He never stayed long in one place. I saw him near the ICU doors, sometimes by radiology, sometimes standing alone at the end of a hall reading charts. He never used a computer. He always carried paper folders, clipped together, edges worn soft. I assumed he preferred old methods. Some doctors did. The strange thing was that he was always there at 4:05 a.m. I noticed it by accident during a slow shift when I checked the clock above the nurse's station, and then saw him walking past, the watch on his wrist catching the light. After that, I noticed it every time. No matter how busy or slow the night was, no matter where I was assigned, at 4:05 a.m. I would see Dr. Harris somewhere in the main corridor. He would give a small nod as he passed, not friendly, not cold, just acknowledgement. Then he would turn a corner and be gone. The night shift runs on patterns. You notice things because there is little else to distract you. So I noticed other details too. I never saw Dr. Harris eat or drink. I never saw him chart at a desk. I never saw him leave the building. He was simply present, then absent, like part of the structure itself. One night, during a lull, I walked down the administrative hallway where the hospital kept framed photos of past staff. The frames were old wood, the glass scratched. Names and dates were printed beneath each photo. I had walked past them dozens of times without looking closely. That night I stopped. About halfway down the hall was a photo that made my stomach tighten. The man in the picture looked exactly like Dr. Harris. Same face, same hairline, same calm eyes. Even the slight droop of the left eyelid matched. The clothes were different, an older style coat, but the man was unmistakable. The name under the photo read Dr. William Harris. The date beneath it read 1978. I stood there longer than I should have. The air felt colder in that hallway. I leaned closer to the glass, searching for differences, for anything that would tell me I was wrong. There were none. The man in the frame could have stepped out of it and walked the halls with me. Later that night, I checked the staff directory. Dr. Harris was listed as an active night physician. His employee number was valid. His credentials were complete. Everything looked normal on the screen. I took the matter to Human Resources during my next shift overlap, careful to frame it as a simple question about the photo display. The response I received was not casual. It was formal, careful, and unsettling. The record showed that Dr. William Harris had died on duty decades ago after collapsing during a night shift. The death was documented. The file was closed. The photo in the hallway was correct. There was no mention of another Dr. Harris. No junior. No relative. No rehired consultant. After that, I paid closer attention. I started writing things down in a small notebook I kept in my locker. Dates, times, locations. Every night he appeared at 4:05 a.m. Every night the same nod. Every night the same watch ticking. I began checking cameras when I could. The hospital security system was old, and many cameras were unreliable, but I noticed something disturbing. In the hallway where I always saw him, the footage skipped from 4:04 to 4:06. Not every night, just often enough to notice. Maintenance blamed outdated equipment. I began to feel watched, not in a dramatic way, but in the subtle sense that comes from being observed by someone who knows more than you do. The hospital felt tighter, its corners sharper. Sleep became shallow. I dreamed of hallways that never ended and clocks that would not move past 4:05. The night it ended started like any other. Rain tapped against the high windows. The smell of antiseptic was stronger than usual. Around 3:50 a.m., the hospital settled into its quietest state. I positioned myself near the main corridor, notebook in my pocket, heart beating faster than it should have. At exactly 4:05 a.m., Dr. Harris appeared. He walked past me, closer than ever before. I noticed details I had missed. The skin on his hands was smooth, unmarked by age spots. His badge was worn but clean. His shoes were polished in a style no one wore anymore. As he passed, he nodded. This time, instead of letting him disappear, I followed. I kept my distance, staying just far enough back to avoid drawing attention. He moved toward the older wing of the hospital, a section scheduled for renovation and rarely used at night. The lights there were dimmer. The walls showed their age. He turned into a records room that had been sealed for years. The door, which should have been locked, stood open. Inside, rows of metal shelves held boxes of paper files. The smell of dust and old ink filled the air. Dr. Harris stood at a table, opening a folder. I stayed near the doorway, heart pounding, afraid to move closer. He removed a document from the folder and looked at it for a long time. I could not see the page, but I saw his face change. Not emotion, but focus, like someone checking their reflection. Then he closed the folder, placed it back in the box, and walked past me without looking. The watch on his wrist ticked louder than ever. He walked down the hall toward the emergency exit. The alarm did not sound when he pushed the door open. Cold air rushed in. Rain blew across the floor. He stepped outside. I followed seconds later. The alley behind the hospital was empty. Wet pavement reflected the security lights. There was nowhere to hide. Dr. Harris was gone. Later that morning, after my shift ended, I went back to the records room with permission granted under routine audit procedures. The box Dr. Harris had opened was labeled with staff files from the 1970s. Inside, I found his folder. The contents were wrong. There were multiple versions of the same documents, updated every few years. New photos, all identical. New signatures, all the same hand. Licenses renewed. Certifications reissued. Each set neatly replaced the last. It was not one life recorded. It was many lives folded into one name. Further digging revealed a pattern across hospitals in different states. all connected by night shifts and short-term contracts. The same name, the same face, different employee numbers. Each time, records quietly corrected themselves. Each time, someone died or retired, and the trail blurred. The official explanation came weeks later. A man had been arrested 2 states away after collapsing during a night shift under the same name. His fingerprints matched no known records. His age was estimated but uncertain. He carried multiple forms of identification, all expertly forged. The case was closed quickly, quietly. Dr. Harris was removed from the directory. The photo in the hallway was taken down. The cameras were upgraded. I still work the night shift. I still check the clock at 4:05 a.m. Nothing happens anymore. No nod. No ticking watch. What scares me is not that he was there, but how easily the hospital made room for him, how the system bent without noticing, how decades passed with the same man walking the same halls while everyone else aged, retired, or died. Some nights, when the building is very quiet, I think about how long he must have practiced becoming invisible. And I understand that the scariest thing was never that he did not age. It was that no one ever looked closely enough to see that he should have. Ward at night never feels like it does during the day. During the day, there is noise layered on top of noise. Machines beep in uneven rhythms, carts roll down the halls, nurses call out room numbers, parents whisper, children cry or laugh or complain. At night, all of that gets stripped away until what remains feels too thin, like the building is holding its breath. I had been working the night shift for almost 3 years at that point, long enough to know the normal sounds the place made when it slept. The low hum of the ventilation, the distant elevator chime, the soft squeak of my shoes on waxed floors. Anything outside of that always stood out. That night I was restocking linens. It was busy work, the kind they give you at night to keep your hands moving and your mind from drifting. Clean sheets, pillowcases, blankets stacked on a cart that never rolled straight no matter how many times maintenance looked at it. The fluorescent lights were dimmed, not off, just low enough to keep the kids asleep. Doors were closed. Name tags and warning signs reflected dull white when I passed them. The air smelled like disinfectant and warm plastic. I checked my watch out of habit. 2:29 a.m. I remember because I had been counting down until the next round. The pediatric wing had a playroom at the center of the floor, glass walls on 2 sides so staff could see inside during the day. At night it stayed dark. The toys were cleaned and put away before visiting hours ended. That was policy. Nothing stayed out. Nothing stayed on. As I pushed the cart past the playroom, I heard a sound that did not belong. It was a child laughing. It was not loud. It was not screaming or crying. It was a soft, breathy laugh, the kind that comes from a kid who is amused but trying not to be. It echoed just enough to tell me it came from a room, not a hallway. I stopped without meaning to. The cart rolled a few inches more and bumped my heel. My first thought was that I was mistaken, that the sound had been something else, maybe a vent or a cart on another floor. Then I heard it again, shorter this time, like a giggle cut off halfway. Every patient on that wing was supposed to be asleep. I knew because I had helped with the last checks. Visiting hours had ended at 9. Parents were either gone or asleep in chairs. Kids that could move on their own were monitored closely at night because of the risk of falls. No one was allowed in the playroom after hours, especially not alone. I turned toward the glass wall. The lights inside the playroom were off, but the hall lights gave enough reflection for me to see the floor. Toys were scattered everywhere. Blocks, plastic animals, puzzles, a small ride-on car tipped on its side. What stopped me was the way they were arranged. They were not thrown around like after a busy afternoon. They were placed. A loose circle, wide and uneven, but intentional. The center was empty. I stood there longer than I should have. The laugh did not come again. My skin felt tight along my arms, like I had brushed against something cold. I told myself a kid must have gotten out of bed. It happened. Sensors were supposed to catch it, but nothing was perfect. I told myself I would see a small shape moving, or hear feet, or at least see a door open somewhere. I pushed the cart to the side and walked closer to the glass. My reflection floated over the dark room, my face pale and stretched by the lighting. I cupped my hands around my eyes to block the glare and looked in. Nothing moved. The toys were still. No shadows. No sign anyone was there. I checked my watch again. 2:31 a.m. I did what I was trained to do. I walked the hall, checking doors, looking at the small windows in each room. Kids were asleep. Chests rose and fell. Machines blinked steadily. Parents were slumped in chairs, heads tilted at uncomfortable angles. No empty beds. No alarms. When I came back to the playroom, the laughter still did not return. The silence felt heavier now, like it was pressing down. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Not bad, just the mixed plastic and cleaner smell of toys that had been wiped down too many times. The floor was cold through my shoes. I crouched and picked up one of the blocks. It was clean. Dry. No fingerprints that stood out. I stood and walked the circle, noticing small details I had missed before. The ride-on car had been placed facing inward. A stuffed bear sat upright, balanced carefully against a stack of books. Someone had taken time to do this. I felt foolish standing there alone, heart racing over toys. I started putting them away. As I worked, I noticed something else. The electronic toys were all switched off. No batteries running. No timers. The ones that could make sounds were silent and dark. I finished cleaning and locked the playroom again. The hall felt longer as I walked away. I did not hear any more laughter. At the end of my shift, I filed a report. I wrote exactly what I had heard and seen. No guesses. No theories. Just times and observations. Security reviewed the motion sensors for the ward. At 2:31 a.m., they had triggered. Not just in the playroom, but in the short stretch of hall outside it. The cameras showed the same thing I had seen. No one entered. No one exited. The doors remained closed. The hall stayed empty. Maintenance checked the sensors. They were working correctly. Environmental services confirmed the playroom had been cleaned and locked before 9. Nursing logs showed no patients out of bed. No alarms. No missing equipment. For a while, that was it. The incident was noted and filed. People joked quietly about it during the day. At night, no one joked. A week later, I was called into an office with security and administration. They had been reviewing older footage, not because of what happened that night, but because of an unrelated audit. The head of security noticed something familiar in a clip from months earlier. Same ward. Same time window. Same sensor triggers. Same empty hall. Same toys in the playroom, arranged in a circle. They pulled more clips. There were 6 in total over the past 2 years. All between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. All on nights when staffing was low. All during my rotation, or the rotation of one other night worker. All logged as unexplained sensor activity with no visible cause. What they found next made my stomach drop. They cross-referenced staff schedules, badge access, and maintenance logs. They noticed that on every one of those nights, a specific piece of equipment had been serviced earlier in the evening. A mobile EEG monitoring unit used for pediatric sleep studies. It was often parked near the playroom storage area when not in use. They tested the unit in a controlled setting. When left idle after a partial shutdown, the internal speaker sometimes played back fragments of stored audio. Not intentionally. A fault in the memory buffer caused short clips to loop. Breathing. Movement. And sometimes laughter. Recordings from previous patients, distorted and delayed. The motion sensors were triggered by the unit as well. Its internal cooling fan kicked on at irregular intervals, causing enough air displacement and vibration to set them off. When the fan started, it also shifted slightly on its wheels, just enough to roll a few inches and stop. The toys had not been moved by the machine. They had been moved by us. On those nights, including mine, staff had entered the playroom to investigate the noise. We had not remembered doing it fully, because it happened during long shifts when fatigue blurred details. We had stepped inside, looked around, and unconsciously shifted things with our feet, our carts, our hands. Over time, the toys ended up in similar patterns because we moved the same way, followed the same paths, stood in the same spots. The laughter I heard came from a child who had been discharged months before. A sound trapped in a machine, released at random. When I think about that night now, what stays with me is not the fear. It is how easily my mind filled in the gaps. How a quiet building and a tired brain can turn ordinary failures into something else entirely. The pediatric ward is still silent after midnight. The machines still hum. And every now and then, when a sensor triggers for no clear reason, I remember how real it felt standing in that dark playroom, convinced that something impossible had just happened, when in truth it was only the hospital replaying pieces of itself. The ICU at County Hospital never really slept. The lights stayed low but never off, a constant gray glow that made time feel thick and slow. Machines hummed and clicked in uneven rhythms, alarms chirped and stopped, then started again somewhere down the hall. The air smelled like disinfectant and warm plastic. It was 1:09 a.m. according to the wall clock, the one that always ran a few minutes fast. I had been on my feet since before sunset, moving from bed to bed, reading monitors, checking lines, adjusting drips. My eyes burned in that dry, gritty way that only comes after too many hours awake. I reached the end of the unit where my patient was assigned, bed 12, near the glass doors that looked out into the empty hallway. He was stable, sedated, breathing with the help of the ventilator. The numbers on the screen were not perfect, but they were acceptable. I did my routine checks, making notes in the chart clipped to the foot of the bed. That was when I noticed another chart hanging there, tucked behind the first one, as if someone had accidentally doubled up. Charts get misplaced sometimes. The unit is busy, and mistakes happen. Still, it caught my attention because it felt wrong right away. The plastic cover was newer than most, clean and stiff, not scuffed like the others. I pulled it free to see which patient it belonged to so I could put it back where it belonged. The name at the top stopped me cold. It was my name. Not similar. Not close. Exactly my name, spelled the same way, including the middle initial that almost no one remembered to use. I felt a quick rush of heat to my face, then a hollow feeling in my chest. I told myself it was a joke, or some kind of clerical error. County hospitals served a huge area. There were thousands of patients. It was possible someone shared my name. I looked closer. The age listed was the same as mine. The birth date matched, down to the year. The allergy list was short, just 2 items, and both were mine. Even the emergency contact field had my sister's first name, though the last name was wrong, like someone had filled it in from memory instead of checking. I flipped through the pages with hands that suddenly felt clumsy. The diagnosis line made my stomach tighten. Complications following overnight shift. That was all it said, no details, no codes. The admission time was earlier that night, just after midnight. The attending physician line was blank. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at the paper, waiting for the panic to settle. Lack of sleep does strange things to the mind. I had seen it before in myself and others. You start seeing patterns that are not there. You read things wrong. I forced a short laugh out of my nose, a reflex more than a real reaction, and told myself someone had accidentally printed a training chart or a test file and left it there. That was the only explanation that made sense. I slid the chart back behind my patients and made a note to tell someone about it later, when things slowed down. They never really slowed down, but I told myself I would remember. I turned to check the monitor again, and that was when I heard the flat tone. At first, my brain tried to place it with the wrong bed. The sound was familiar, sharp and steady, the kind that drills straight into your spine. I looked at my patient's screen. His heart rate was still there, the green line rising and falling. The oxygen numbers were steady. Nothing was wrong. The sound was coming from behind me. I turned around slowly. Across the room was bed 13. It was empty. It had been empty all night. I knew that because I had passed it at least a dozen times, and the sheets had been clean and tight, the mattress bare except for the thin pad. There had been no monitor on, no 4-pole hooked up, nothing plugged in. Now the monitor was on. The screen glowed bright in the dim room, and the line across it was flat. The alarm continued, loud and unbroken. I stared at it, my mind refusing to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. There was no patient in the bed. The sheets were still smooth, undisturbed. The bed rails were down. I stepped closer, my shoes squeaking softly on the floor. The monitor was fully connected, leads hanging over the side of the bed, wires trailing down to the outlets. Everything was set up as if someone had been there moments before, and then vanished without moving anything. I reached out and touched the mattress. It was warm. That detail bothered me more than anything else. Beds cool quickly in the ICU. The room is kept cold on purpose. A warm mattress meant recent use. Very recent. The flatline sound finally cut off, replaced by a softer alert that indicated a disconnected patient. I realized then that the leads were not attached to anything. They were just resting on the sheet, perfectly placed. My mouth felt dry. I swallowed and looked back toward bed 12, toward the chart with my name on it. A heavy pressure settled behind my eyes, like the start of a headache, but deeper. I tried to think through it logically. Equipment gets moved. Monitors get tested. Beds get warmed. There was always a rational explanation. Still, my hands were shaking. I went back to the chart and pulled it out again. This time I read every line slowly. The vitals section had entries already filled in, handwritten, neat, and steady. Blood pressure slightly low. Heart rate irregular. Notes about dizziness, blurred vision, extreme fatigue. Symptoms I had been ignoring for weeks. There was a progress note time-stamped 1:05 a.m. It mentioned loss of consciousness. I checked my watch. It read 1:12 a.m. A wave of nausea rolled through me, sudden and intense. The room felt too small, the ceiling too low. I leaned a hand on the bed rail to steady myself. My pulse thudded hard in my ears, uneven and fast. I tried to take a deep breath, and found that my chest did not want to expand the way it should. The realization came together in pieces, slow and unwanted. The empty bed was not empty, because no one had been assigned to it. It was empty because no one had arrived yet. The chart was not a mistake. It was waiting. I thought about the past few months, the extra shifts I had picked up, the nights where I had slept in my car between doubles, the headaches I treated with caffeine and stubbornness. I thought about the times I had felt my vision narrow when I stood up too fast, the moments where my hands tingled and went numb. I had told myself it was normal. Everyone felt like that sometimes. The pressure in my chest sharpened into pain, not crushing but heavy, like something pressing down from the inside. I felt lightheaded, the edges of the room dimming. I took a step toward the door and had to stop, my legs suddenly weak. The monitors around me continued their steady noises, indifferent. I understood then that the chart was not predicting something far away. It was recording something that had already started. The flat line was not a warning. It was a placeholder, waiting for the moment to become real. My vision tunneled, the center narrowing to the empty bed. I could see myself there without seeing myself, the outline of where a body would lie, where the wires would connect. The warmth of the mattress made sense now. I tried to call for help and found that my voice would not come out. My jaw felt tight, my tongue thick. I focused on staying upright, on keeping my eyes open, but the effort was slipping away from me. The room tilted, slow and heavy. As I sank down, the last thing I noticed was how calm everything else remained. The machines did not rush. The lights did not change. The ICU kept breathing the way it always did, ready to absorb another patient without pause. I did not feel myself hit the floor. Later, though I do not know how much later, there was a sense of returning, not all at once but in fragments. The weight of blankets, the pressure of something on my chest, the familiar beeping of a monitor, close now, personal. My eyes opened to the low gray light of the ICU ceiling. I was in bed 13. The chart at the foot of the bed was clipped neatly in place, no longer doubled up with anyone else's. The name at the top was mine, and this time it felt correct. The monitor beside me showed a steady line, not perfect, but present. The bed was warm because I was in it. The empty space across the room where I had been standing was already being cleaned, wiped down, reset. Another shift would come on soon. The unit would keep moving. The chart had never been wrong. It had only been early. I work nights because the hospital is quieter and because I like routines that don't change. St. Anne's Medical Center has been my job for 6 years. I know every hallway, every stain on the floor tiles, every place where the lights flicker for half a second before turning fully on. I transport bodies from the upper floors down to the morgue when families are gone and charts are signed. It is not dramatic work. It is slow, careful, and boring. That night started the same way every other night did. It was just before 1 in the morning. The air smelled like disinfectant and warm plastic from the floor buffers. The halls were empty except for the low hum of vents and the distant beeping of machines behind closed doors. I had a gurney with clean sheets pulled tight, straps folded neatly at the sides. The body had already been covered and tagged. No blood, no mess, nothing unusual. I checked the wrist tag, checked the paperwork, and moved on. That part of the job is mechanical. I don't think about the person. I think about not hitting walls and not waking anyone up. The elevator bank near the service hallway is the one we use for this. It is old but reliable. 2 elevators, both slow, both loud. The buttons are worn smooth from decades of use. Everyone who works nights knows the rules. Floors go from the main levels down to B2. B2 is the lowest. That is where the morgue is. There is no B3. There has never been a B3. I have heard people joke about it during breaks, but it is just that, a joke. I rolled the gurney inside and hit B2. The doors slid shut with the same dull sound they always make. The elevator lurched slightly as it started to go down. I leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, watching the numbers light up one by one. The ride always takes longer at night. The system slows down to save power. I looked at my watch out of habit. It was 12:58 a.m. Halfway down, I felt the elevator hesitate. Not stop, just pause long enough for me to notice. Then the panel made a soft click and another light turned on. Below B2, there was another label glowing red. B3. I stared at it longer than I should have. I remember thinking it was a glitch, some leftover wiring that got power for a second. The elevator kept moving. The sound of the cables changed. It was deeper, like the car was going farther than it ever does. The air felt colder, and the lights dimmed just a little. Not enough to be dramatic, just enough to make the corners feel darker. The ride took longer than usual. Much longer. I checked my watch again, then checked my phone to make sure it wasn't frozen. Time was still moving. I could feel the elevator descending, steady and smooth. No alarms. No shaking. Just going down. When the doors opened, I did not see the morgue hallway. I saw a corridor that looked like part of the hospital, but wrong in small ways. The ceiling was lower. The lights were yellow instead of white. The floor tiles were smaller and darker, with cracks filled in by uneven lines of old sealant. The walls were painted a dull green that I had only seen in old photos from the hospital archives. The air smelled different too. Less clean. More like dust and old paper. There were people moving down the hallway. Staff. They wore uniforms that didn't match anything current. The fabric looked thicker, stiffer. Their shoes were old styles, scuffed and heavy. They moved with purpose, but slowly, like everything here ran at a different pace. No one looked surprised to see me or the gurney. No one stopped me. At the far end of the hallway was a desk with papers stacked in uneven piles. Behind it were metal cabinets with chipped paint. Everything looked used, not abandoned, but worn down by decades of hands. I felt like I had stepped into a part of the hospital that had been sealed off and forgotten, but still running somehow. I stayed where I was. The gurney wheels were locked. My hands were gripping the rail, without me realizing it. I felt a tight pressure in my chest, not panic exactly, but something close to it. The sense that I was somewhere I should not be, somewhere that was not meant to be accessible anymore. One of the staff members looked directly at me. There was recognition in the look, not confusion. That was the part that stayed with me. It felt like I had missed something important, like arriving at the wrong time for a scheduled task. Before I could move or think through what to do, the elevator doors started to close on their own. I did not touch the buttons. I did not step forward. The doors slid shut slowly, as if giving me time to react, but my body would not respond. The hallway disappeared behind the metal panels. The elevator began to rise. The ride up was faster. The lights brightened. The air warmed. The panel showed B2 again, as if nothing else had happened. When the doors opened, I was back in the normal morgue hallway. White walls. Bright lights. The familiar smell of chemicals. The quiet hum of refrigeration units behind steel doors. I stood there for a long time without moving. The gurney was still in front of me. Everything was exactly where it should be. I checked my watch. It read 3:14 a.m. I knew I had not been in the elevator for over 2 hours. My phone confirmed it. There were no missed calls. No messages. No alarms. Just a clean jump in time that made no sense. I finished the transport, because that is what you do. I logged the paperwork. I washed my hands. I sat in the break room and drank water until my hands stopped shaking. I did not tell anyone right away. Hospitals run on explanations, and I did not have one that fit. Later that week, I asked maintenance about the elevator in a careful way. I mentioned a delay, a long ride. They pulled the logs. According to the system, the elevator never went below B2. There was no record of a stop or even a slow down. The timestamps showed the car left the floor and arrived at B2 in the normal amount of time. I went to records after that. Old floor plans. Archived renovation documents. Buried in files from decades ago, I found references to a lower level that had been sealed off during an expansion. It was not listed as B3. It did not officially exist anymore. It had been closed due to outdated infrastructure and safety issues. The recommendation was complete isolation, not demolition. Too expensive to remove. Easier to forget. Security footage from that night showed me entering the elevator at 12:58 a.m. It showed the doors opening at B2 less than a minute later. Then it showed me standing there, unmoving, for over 2 hours, staring straight ahead. The gurney did not move. I did not check my phone. I did not slump or sit. I just stood. At 3:14 a.m., the footage showed me blink, look down at my watch, and start moving again. I still work nights. I still use the elevators. That panel no longer lights up below B2. Maintenance says the wiring was cleaned up after a recent inspection. I believe them. I also take the stairs whenever I can. The hospital feels the same as it always has, but I pay attention now to how old it really is, how many layers are buried under the ones we see every day. What happened has a place in the records now, filed under equipment irregularities and unexplained downtime. It has explanations that sound reasonable on paper, but I know where I was not supposed to go, and I know how easily the building let me in. I work nights because the hospital is quieter then, and because I need the money. Mercy General after midnight has its own rhythm. The lights are always too bright in the halls and never bright enough in the rooms. The air smells like cleaning spray and warm plastic. The machines hum in a steady way that makes time feel thick, like it moves slower here than anywhere else. I know every sound on my floor. I know which elevator door sticks, and which cart has a bad wheel. By that winter, I had been on nights long enough that nothing surprised me anymore, or so I thought. Room 612 sat at the end of the east hallway. The door had a printed sign taped to it for weeks saying the room was out of order because of plumbing problems. A pipe had burst behind the wall and soaked the floor. They had ripped out part of the bathroom ceiling and left the tiles stacked in the room. Housekeeping kept the door closed, and no patients were assigned there. It stayed dark. No bed made. No equipment plugged in. It was just a dead space we walked past. The call light panel for that room was still active on the board. Maintenance said the wiring was old and sometimes shorted out. The first time it lit up, they reset it and said it should be fine. The second time, they rolled their eyes and said it was the same thing. By the third time, the charge nurse told us to ignore it unless it stayed on. It usually blinked once and went away. That night was slow. It was late winter in Chicago, the kind of cold that makes the windows sweat and the air feel heavy. Most of the patients were sleeping. I had finished rounds early and was sitting at the nurse's station, staring at the monitor screens and sipping coffee that tasted burned no matter how much cream I added. My badge was still clipped to my scrub top. I had not logged out of the charting system because I was planning to finish notes soon. At 3:42 a.m., the call light for 612 turned solid red. It did not blink. It stayed on. I waited, counting breaths, expecting it to clear. It did not. The hallway was empty. No one else looked up. The other nurses were busy in rooms at the other end of the floor. I stood there longer than I should have. The light felt wrong in a way I could not explain. It was not fear exactly. It was more like a pressure in my chest, like when you forget something important and your body knows before your mind does. I grabbed a vitals machine out of habit. I do not know why I did that. Maybe because that is what you do when a call light goes on. The floor tiles were cold through my shoes as I walked down the hallway. The closer I got to 612, the quieter everything seemed, even though the machines were still humming. The door was unlocked. That alone made my stomach tighten. Housekeeping usually locked it. Inside, the room was dark except for the faint glow from the hallway spilling in. The air smelled different than the rest of the floor. There was antiseptic, but underneath it was something stale, like old flowers left too long in water. The bed was made. That stopped me. I knew it had been stripped. I had seen the bare mattress myself earlier that week. The vitals machine wheels sounded too loud on the floor. I remember noticing dust patterns where equipment had been moved. The bathroom door was half open. The mirror was fogged over, like someone had just run hot water. The sink was dry. The shower curtain was still pulled back, and the tub was empty. The fog did not make sense. The call light went off as soon as I stepped fully into the room. The silence after that was complete. No beeping. No alarms. Just the low hum of the building. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. My skin felt tight, like I was standing too close to a heater. I moved closer to the bed. The sheets were warm. That detail is burned into my memory. Hospital sheets do not stay warm in empty rooms. They cool fast. I did what my body knows how to do when my brain stalls. I took vitals. Blood pressure cuff around an arm I did not look at closely. Pulse from the machine. Oxygen reading steady. Temperature normal. Everything looked fine. I wrote it down on the worksheet without thinking. My hands were steady. That scares me more now than anything else. I acted like this was routine. I left the room after that. I did not turn off the light because it was already off. I did not lock the door because my hands felt numb. When I reached the nurse's station, I logged the vitals into the system. My name filled in automatically. The room number matched. I did not question it. I finished my shift on autopilot and went home as the sun came up, my head buzzing with exhaustion. I slept for a few hours and came back the next night. During morning report, a nurse from days asked why vitals had been charted in 612. She sounded confused, not accusing. She said the patient listed there had died the previous winter, during a snowstorm when the ER was backed up. The room had been shut down after because of the plumbing. There was no current patient assigned. The vitals were real numbers, not zeros or placeholders. They had my login attached to them, time stamped at 3:44 a.m. I checked the system myself. The entry was there. Blood pressure, pulse, oxygen, temperature. All normal. My badge had been used to access the chart. There was no sign of a break-in on the system. No alert. No override. Just a normal entry like any other. Administration got involved. They reviewed security footage from the hallway. The camera showed me walking down to 612 with the vitals machine and coming back out a few minutes later. The door opened and closed. No one else entered or exited. The camera inside the room had been disabled months ago when the ceiling was opened. There was no footage from inside. Maintenance checked the plumbing again. They said humidity from the broken pipe could cause condensation on the mirror. They said heat from the vents could warm the bed. They said the call light wiring ran through the same wall as the pipe and could short under the right conditions. Every explanation sounded fine on its own. Together, they did not sit right. What finally made it clear happened a week later. IT ran a deeper audit after administration pushed them. They found that my login had been used again in the early morning hours on a night I was not scheduled. The vitals were different that time. Slightly elevated pulse. Slightly low oxygen. The entry was corrected a few minutes later by the system itself when the chart was closed. The patient name on the chart had been changed months ago, merged incorrectly with another record after a software update. The room number still pointed to 612. Someone had been using that room. Security did a sweep and found a man sleeping in the ceiling space above the bathroom. He was thin, dehydrated, and wearing scrubs from a closed clinic. He had been accessing empty rooms at night, using the showers when water was on, using terminals when badges were left logged in. He knew enough about the system to move without setting off alarms. He had been hiding in the hospital for months. The patient whose chart I had accessed had not been dead when the vitals were taken. The record was wrong. The man had been admitted under an old name, discharged, and then re-entered in the system without a proper merge. The chart showed deceased because someone clicked the wrong box during cleanup. The body had never been there. The record said it was. Room 612 was sealed after that. The call light wiring was replaced. The chart was fixed. Policies were updated about logging out. Everyone moved on. I still think about the warmth of the sheets and how normal the numbers looked on the screen. I think about how easy it was for my hands to do their job without my mind catching up. The scariest part is not the room or the light or the mirror. It is knowing that nothing unreal happened at all. Everything fit inside the rules of the place I trusted. I walked into a room that should have been empty and did my job so well that the system accepted it without question. The night shift always slowed down after midnight, not because nothing happened, but because everything important already had. By 2 a.m, the emergency room felt hollowed out, like a building that was still awake but thinking about sleep. The lights stayed bright, too bright for the hour, and the floors shined in a way that made every footprint look permanent. The air smelled like disinfectant layered over old coffee and warm plastic from the machines that never stopped humming. I was working the nurse's station, sorting through charts and finishing the kind of paperwork that never made it into training videos. The waiting room had been cleared for a while. The trauma bays were quiet. The monitors beeped at steady, boring rhythms. My screen showed the patient board, a grid of names, rooms, times, and notes. I refreshed it out of habit, even though I knew nothing would change. At 2:17 a.m., I noticed movement at the edge of my vision. That kind of movement always caught my attention at night, because it usually meant something had gone wrong. When I looked up, there was a man standing at the counter. He wore a blue hospital gown. It was the thin kind that never closed right in the back, the fabric washed so many times it felt almost paper soft. He stood straight, hands resting lightly on the counter, like he had been there a while. He did not look confused or panicked. His face was calm in a way that did not match the place or the hour. I glanced back at the board immediately. Every patient in the ER was listed there. Names, room numbers, status. None of them matched what I was seeing. No male patient in a gown without an assigned room. No one marked as waiting. No one pending discharge. I looked back at him. His wrist was bare. No ID band. That alone made my stomach tighten. Patients did not just lose those. They were put on the moment someone walked through the door. I scanned him from head to toe. No blood. No visible injuries. His gown was clean. His feet were bare against the floor, slightly gray from walking. I asked for his name. I remember the sound of my own voice, flat and tired, echoing a little in the open space. He looked at me like the question was strange, like the answer should have been obvious. He smiled, small and tight, and told me I had already discharged him. That made no sense. I handled discharges. I would have remembered. I checked the board again, slower this time, scrolling back through earlier entries, looking for anything recently cleared. Nothing. No record that matched him. No discharge at that time of night without paperwork, without notes, without follow-up instructions printed and signed. I told myself it was probably someone from another unit who wandered down, confused or misdirected. It happened sometimes, especially with older patients or people coming off medication. But he did not look confused. He stood still, patient, watching me work like he knew how this went. I stepped away from the counter and walked the short distance to the workstation, pretending I needed a different terminal. I wanted space to think. The hum of the printers and the low buzz of the lights filled my ears. I pulled up the admission log, the one that showed everyone who had entered the ER that night, including transfers and quick triage cases. There was no record of him. I went through it line by line. The timestamps were exact. Names, ages, complaint codes. A woman with chest pain at 9:42 p.m. A teenager with a broken wrist at 10:15. A drunk driver brought in by State Patrol just before midnight. The log was clean. There were no gaps. No missing entries. When I looked back up, he was still there. Same position. Same expression. 7 minutes passed like that, though it did not feel like 7 minutes in the moment. It felt stretched thin, like time was dragging itself forward 1 second at a time. I checked the security monitor that showed the entrance hallway. The screen displayed the same empty corridor it had all night. No one walking in. No doors opening. I rewound the feed manually, my fingers stiff on the controls. The footage showed the desk, the hallway, the waiting room chairs. At 2:10 a.m., the space was empty. At 2:17, he was suddenly there, already standing at the counter. No door opening. No movement leading up to it. I felt a cold pressure settle in my chest. Hospitals ran on systems. Even when things went wrong, there was always a trace. A badge swipe. A camera angle. A log entry. Something. This had none of that. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Fatigue did strange things. Night shifts blurred reality. I looked at the man again and noticed small details I had missed. His gown tag was faded almost white, the print barely readable. His skin looked dry, like he had been under harsh air for too long. His eyes were open and focused, but there was a flatness to them, like he was looking through me instead of at me. I started to walk around the desk, planning to escort him to triage and figure it out properly. Before I reached him, the quiet shattered. The cardiac alarm went off in Trauma Bay 2. The sound cut through everything, sharp and urgent, the kind of noise that bypassed thought and went straight to muscle memory. My body moved before my brain caught up. Trauma Bay 2 was empty. It had been empty all night. No patient assigned. No monitor connected. I ran. The hallway felt longer than it ever had. The lights seemed harsher, the floor slick under my shoes. The alarm echoed off the walls, relentless. When I reached the bay, the door was already open. The bed was occupied. A man lay on the gurney, his body stiff and angled wrong, the thin hospital sheet pulled up to his chest. The monitor above him flashed erratic lines, alarms screaming. The leads were attached, placed correctly, like someone had taken time to do it right. His wrist had an ID band now, printed clean and new. It was the same man. Same face. Same build. Same faded blue gown. The same calm expression, even now, eyes half open, unfocused. His skin had a gray tone under the lights that made my throat tighten. This was not someone who had just arrived. This was someone who had been here longer than the system said. Staff flooded in, responding to the alarm, hands moving fast, bodies filling the space. Procedures kicked in. The room became controlled chaos, exactly the way it was supposed to be when a life was on the line. I stood back when I was told to, my hands shaking, my mind stuck on the impossible fact that minutes ago he had been standing at the desk. I watched the monitor until the lines flattened into something steady and final. The alarm stopped. The room grew quiet again, but it was a different quiet now, heavier, pressing down. When the paperwork started, the questions came. They always did. Who admitted him? When he arrived? Where he came from? I had no answers that fit the forms. The ID band showed a name and date of birth that belonged to a man who had been discharged earlier that evening after being cleared for chest pain. Same name, same information, same record number. That patient's chart showed a normal workup. Clean tests, stable vitals, discharged with instructions and a follow-up appointment. The discharge time was 1:58 a.m. There was no record of a return, no triage note, no new admission, nothing that explained how he ended up dead in an empty trauma bay less than 30 minutes later. Security pulled footage from every camera. They watched him appear at the desk and stand there. They watched me move back and forth. They watched me leave the area when the alarm sounded. They watched Trauma Bay 2 remain empty until the moment the alarm triggered, at which point the camera feed glitched for less than a second. When it came back, the bed was occupied. They checked badge logs. No doors opened. No staff entered the bay during that time. By morning, administration had explanations that fit policy language but not reality. System error. Duplicate records. Human oversight. The kind of words that closed investigations and let everyone go home. I went home after my shift and did not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing at the counter, waiting with quiet patience, like he knew exactly how it would end. Weeks later, I pulled the chart again, breaking rules I had followed for years. The original patient, the one who had been discharged, had collapsed in the parking lot on his way home. He was found unresponsive by a passerby at 2:12 a.m. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. He was never brought back inside. There was no readmission. No second chance. The time of death matched the moment the man appeared at the desk. There were no ghosts in that building. No shadows moving on their own. Just systems that failed to catch something that did not belong in a system at all. A man who had been cleared, sent away, and still came back, not to haunt, not to warn, but because the process was not finished yet. I still work nights. I still refresh the board when nothing should change. And every time the hallway is quiet and the desk is empty, I remember that the system only knows what we tell it. Everything else can still walk in on its own, stand in front of you under bright lights, and wait to be noticed.